I am amazed and impressed by these beginner women who step into these rural communities and who are taking on roles and trying to get the education and trying to get the hands-on skilled experience and trying to access land. And we need people so badly. Like, we actually don't have time to sit around and decide who is welcome and who is not. We need activated, engaged hearts and minds at the soil surface today, and increasingly in the future, as we're seeing our landscapes transition. There's a lot of opportunity for people who want to get into agriculture. It just doesn't always look like how it did for grandpa or great grandpa.
That's Amber Smith, Executive Director of Women in Ranching, and one of the guests on today's podcast. You're listening to Down to Earth, the Planet to Plate podcast, a co-production of Radio Cafe and Quivira Coalition. I'm your host, Mary Charlotte Domandi. We'll be right back after this quick announcement. Quivira Coalition is finishing out a busy spring workshop season. There are still some in-person soil health-related offerings in Colorado coming up, as well as the Colorado Coalition to Enhance Working Land's annual summit happening on the Western Slope. Check out Quivira's events page, quiviracoalition.org/events. Quivira is Quivira. And now to our program. I'm so happy to introduce today's guests. Amber Smith is Executive Director of Women in Ranching, and that's a nonprofit that started out as a program of the Western Landowners Alliance and became an independent organization several years back. Amber is a rancher along with her husband at Antelope Springs Ranch in Montana, and Kristen Kipp is a board member at Women in Ranching, and she herself is a rancher at Kipp Livestock. She's a member of the Blackfeet Nation in Montana, and she's been featured in the Life in the Land film series. You can find it at lifeintheland.org. It's all about connecting people and place in Montana. Welcome, ladies, to Down to Earth.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Let's hear from both of you. How did each of you become a cattle rancher? Do you want to start, Amber?
Sure. I'm a first-generation rancher. I did not grow up in agriculture. I came to the West via the dude ranch industry. I was working as a wrangler, fell in love with these landscapes, also fell in love with the human, and that was my step into ranching and agriculture. And that was in my very early, I was 19 when I came west, and so it seems like a whole lifetime ago that I was a beginner. But I think anyone who's in agriculture or in these rural communities knows if you're not third, fourth, fifth, or 10th generation, you're a beginner your whole life. So I'm learning every single day and really happy to be a part of these rural landscapes.
And I just want to say, being a beginner can have a lot of advantages because you're open to seeing things in all kinds of different ways. Do you feel that way?
Oh, 100%. Anytime you have someone come into a thing that they didn't grow up in, it creates opportunities where they can ask questions of why are we doing it this way, or what's the benefit of this? And so often we're working really hard and we forget to ask ourselves those questions, and we go, yeah, I don't know. That's how grandpa did it. So I guess that's why we've been doing it this way. Yeah, so definitely that fresh perspective is healthy.
Kristen, what about you?
Well, I grew up on a cattle ranch in northwestern Montana, and I think I always wanted to ranch or to have that, have an outdoor lifestyle, but it's pretty difficult to get your foot in the door. And what I was told growing up is if you either have to inherit it or marry it. So I went off to college, kind of spread my wings and traveled, and I just kept dreaming of the land. Like, I would dream every night of my home, or I guess our ancestral homeland. I think the call was so strong for me that I eventually did. I came back and I told myself, everybody says that you can't do it, but maybe I'll always be a hobby rancher. Maybe I'll only be able to raise one, two, three head of cows, or maybe the right opportunities will come along where it can be a living. I can make a living. I could feed my family with this. And I'll never know if I don't try. When my second child was born, she was a year old, and my son was a little older. And I just took a leap of faith. And now I've built it up and I love it. I wanted to raise my children outdoors. I wanted them to have a love for the land and a love for all living things and instill values in them that were really important for me. We don't do like super high intensive grazing, but we try to do more intensive grazing and just raising them more natural. And a lot of them, I didn't know what it was called until learning later. A lot of it's like regenerative grazing methods, or there's different names for this type of, but it just came from wanting to not pour our heart and soul into everything that we had and still lose money at the end of the day. So some of it was like we want to raise our animals ethically to be healthier, the healthiest they can be, but also like I shouldn't have to work off the ranch to subsidize this ranching addiction.
do, do you feel like doing regenerative methods saves you money? I mean, is that part of making the business successful?
Yeah, I think it does. You're retaining your cows longer. So, like, it's a really rough rule of thumb, but it takes 5 years for a cow, five calves for a cow to pay herself off. For that cow to make money for the ranch, it takes 8 years for her to be producing within the herd. So, the longer you can retain the females, the better. But we have a like 59-day growing season.
Oh
So,
my goodness.
grass versus hay. So one of the practices too is trying to do more winter grazing or grazing in general as opposed to feeding hay. And hay is like the number one cost. But because of the weather, you still need to feed hay during, especially during storms and stuff. But yeah, there's definitely things I can see that have improved the bottom line. So we're not just losing money.
When you went home from, you went to college and you went out into the world and then you really had this call to come home. You said you grew up on a ranch. Did you go home? Was it your family's ranch? Did you literally go home?
Yeah, I did. I have a home on the family ranch, but I didn't get cows right away. My son raised hogs for quite a while. He had like a flock of 50 chickens and sold eggs to the school, but I didn't ranch right away. In the beginning, I volunteered at our local stock growers association, and I felt like, I don't really belong. Like, I'm not really a rancher. I don't have any livestock. It was probably a few years and before I actually full-fledged like just dove in and I'm like, this is what I truly love. Like I love people and I love the land. And then I start working in agriculture. Now I sit on the Women in Ranching board and the Native American Agriculture Fund board. And I love it. It's allowed me freedom to raise my children in a different way. And I think that's super important, that connection to the outside world.
So you really brought them with you from the time that they were small, outdoors doing the work?
Yeah, I was a single parent much of the time. And it literally was, I can think of so many evenings, weekends, summers where we would be out working, like fencing, moving cows. So, like, extremely labor intensive. And my kids grew up with, I've done it all. I used to be really active into hunting, backpacking, and I have a saying like, if you can do it, I've done it with a baby on my back. It makes things really hard at times, but at the same time, it gives you an appreciation and it gives you different experiences for your children, which to me was really important.
Amber, what about you? You're also a mother. Did your kids grow up doing the work alongside you and your partner?
Oh yeah. Yep. So my kids are now 12 and 14, and they're absolutely the best help that we can find. I'm already mourning the day when they go out into the world. But to Kristen's point, I mean, I know the photos of like families and green grass and horses looking happy. There was, a lot of mornings with tears of getting up early. I think one of the things that I've learned from my kids, my son is happy to ride horses, but he's even happier to ride his dirt bike. I think so often people have very narrow ideas of cattle should only be moved on horseback, or it's a waste of time to use horses. Why wouldn't you use a four-wheeler side by side? And one of the moments that was kind of an aha for me was the first year that we raised and kept heifers here at the ranch. We didn't sell them off as calves. We kept them to retain in our herd. And we were moving them out to pasture with a side by side, a dirt bike, two four-wheelers, and two border collies. And those heifers just walked so happy and had no concern about the different types of energy that were moving around them because they were home and they were with the people who've been doing that with them, their whole lives. Yeah, I felt really proud.
Well, one thing that it sounds like you both have really given your kids is a love of the outdoors, and I imagine that they are not addicted, or at least less addicted to being on their devices all day long because they're actually interacting with something real.
Yeah, well, after days of working together, we'll come in the house and yell, everyone has individual time, and we all just scatter to some little hidey hole. And whether it's books or devices, yeah, just getting away from group activity to that individual time. So I think there's just always balance to all of it.
Well, let's talk about the thing we're here to talk about, which is women in ranching. And one of the things that I've heard from a number of people is that women ranchers are sometimes just not seen. Like people assume if they see you at all that you're someone's girlfriend or you're a rancher's wife or whatever, as opposed to a rancher. Have either or both of you experienced that? Do you hear that from other women in the women rancher community?
I can jump in.
I was going to say, I'll let you jump in here, Kristen.
Well, in my opinion, agriculture is extremely white male dominated. There's like an unspoken culture, and it's not necessarily all good things. When I first started doing advocacy and volunteering and being more active, it was like women didn't usually speak up in, say, these public meetings or other places unless they held some type of position, like with their job. I did a few studies in wildlife management and intersecting with agriculture. I advocated for resources, for jobs, for policy changes, etc. But when I would have to speak, if I was presenting information, the looks I would get, like, this is an unspoken thing. Like, so I served on the governor's Grizzly Bear Advisory Council, and I found my voice and my confidence, and then I was pretty much on a roll. And I've been a train barreling down a track ever since.
One of the things that so many women come up against is the kind of like myths and narratives that so many of us have internalized about the role of women, whether it be in ranching or agriculture or farming or whatever. Amber, I was wondering if you could talk about that.
One of the stories I like to share is the harm that those narratives create for all people. Because when the myth and the story being told is that men have a certain role, women have a certain role, children are taking all that information and having a narrow idea of what's allowable for them. I see these huge pressures on men's shoulders that if this fails, if we go broke, it's all my fault. And I see that weight on people in my community every day. And when we hear the statistics of suicide in rural communities, none of it surprises me because we have these myths around independence, these mythical ideas about what work belongs to whom. Like I am amazed and impressed by these beginner women who step into these rural communities and who are taking on roles and trying to get the education and trying to get the hands-on skilled experience and trying to access land. And we need people so badly. Like, we actually don't have time to sit around and decide who is welcome and who is not. We need activated, engaged hearts and minds at the soil surface today. And increasingly in the future, as we're seeing our landscapes transition, there's a lot of opportunity for people who want to get into agriculture. It just doesn't always look like how it did for grandpa or great grandpa. And what I see a lot at Women in Ranching is that folks have internalized these myths, and that a big barrier is just the stories they've created in their own head. Like, I'm a woman, so my only role that I can have here is to be the cook and the housekeep. I'm a woman, and so I must participate by being the hired man's wife, the ranch manager's wife. I can't use the word rancher. I can't wear a cowboy hat because maybe I'm not really a rancher. As someone who's first generation, I hear a lot of these things from other people stepping into agriculture. And when they're in a room, in an educational space and a hands-on skill building space, whether it's virtual or in person, and they're surrounded by other people of different generations that share some of their stories and experiences, that support propels action and change. So today, when I was out riding and the hired man was sassing me about, we're going to go through this corner gate, and he says, "Oh no, there's no way we can do that. We got to take him through the gate on the west." I actually know someone I could call and say, "Can you believe this? I've lived here for 15 years, and there's a 19-year-old boy who's going to tell me which gate we're going to go through." And everyone can laugh and tell their own stories of, "Oh, yeah, you think that's good? Let me tell you." Having that kind of support and that kind of a network creates change, and it creates confidence, and it creates courage, and it creates ability to say, "You know what? Actually, I know there's this piece of land for lease. I know that I can go to the FSA. I know that when I run into barriers there, like, I actually know someone in this network who has successfully gotten funding from FSA. I'm going to call them and figure out how to get this done." Like, that's what I see as people stepping outside of whatever stories they've been holding. And I mean, Kristen's story is a perfect example of someone who pushed up against all kinds of barriers and kept pushing until she got what she wanted to get accomplished.
So, what you're talking about, like having a group of people that you can call and offer that support and laugh with, that's a piece of what Women in Ranching does. Talk about the activities that the group is doing ongoing and is organizing.
So I think, the very earliest days, if we roll back to 2016, those gatherings were very, very focused on that peer network and peer support and finding community. People love that. They love the community. They love the people they find. And then the request and the push is, we want more. We want more educational opportunities. We want more opportunities for building our skills. And so one of the initiatives that we launched this year is our regrant initiative. And just this month in our newsletter, we launched a regrant opportunity for women in the community who want to host educational sessions, who want to host skill building sessions, who have skills that they want to teach other women. And so, yes, we as an organization are taking on a big lift of what is the education and hands-on work that we as an org need to do. And I'd love to hear from Kristen, like why particular education was so important and necessary for her own building of a ranch enterprise and other women to find success.
As I got started ranching, I saved for, I think it was about 11 months, 11 or 12 months, and I was a single mom raising two kids. I got a loan from Stockman Bank. They were awesome to work with, or I signed up, I'm in this program with FSA or NRCS or whatever it was. And there was a lot of hesitancy, one with, not feeling like, okay, I literally have two cows. Hey, does that make me a rancher? And not feeling like I belonged. And really, it was finding my own voice. I was wildly successful in my advocacy efforts, which like just completely shocked me. That gave me confidence. Maybe I don't have a ton of cows, but my voice is important and I do belong. I'm Native American. We have been historically discriminated against for a very long time, especially in agriculture. So there's a lot of hesitancy, not just with me, but with my peers of utilizing resources. So if I heard that somebody had a good outcome, then I was like, okay, I'm going to try this. So a lot of it was my own pushing forward, not just taking no for an answer and trying to become more educated, but having support. There's women that have supported me professionally, personally, maybe they're friends, and Amber's one of them. I knew that if I had a problem, personal, professional, whatever it might be, that I could call up and rely on them to support me, to have good feedback, to give me a good perspective that would help me kind of settle things. The other thing that was really good for me, I did some work in leadership. And one of the things that is so important is not just being able to identify and call out. We don't create change without speaking up and having the courage and having the bravery, being fierce, but also kind and compassionate. That was really important, not just for myself, but to be able to cultivate change in other circles, that ripple effect.
Can you think of an example where you or somebody else found that courage to call someone out and really speak up when in another situation you might not have, but where you did and it made a difference?
Well, this story I tell a lot. It was probably the first time that I had to be really extremely brave and nobody was expecting it. When I was first on the Grizzly Bear Advisory Council, so a little backstory on the Blackfeet Nation at that time, over a 5 year period, I did a study. We had 30% of the cattle depredations from the entire state on the Blackfeet Nation, which was 1/50th the size of the state of Montana. So we're experiencing a lot of human safety issues, a lot of cattle depredations. Cattle ranching is our bread and butter here. It's taking a lot financially off of working families who are just trying to make a living. So I went to my very first meeting and there it was very well publicized, a lot of press there. We had state directors, regional directors from all different agencies, and the state director of Fish, Wildlife, and Parks got up and spoke about the Blackfeet Nation being the success story for grizzly bear conservation and management. One of the sites where they would relocate problem bears is right at the base of the mountains, probably about 8 to 10 miles west of me. Anyway, we were like the golden child. We were lifted up in this huge meeting, and I knew in my heart that I had to say something because if I didn't, it wouldn't be speaking up for the truth that I knew. And so I did. I remember like my hands were shaking, my voice was shaking. And I said, we are not the poster child. We are not the success story. We are the story of what not to do. That was how I got my foot in the door with advocacy, is because I had some human safety issues with my children and bears coming into the yard when my kids would be out playing or my baby was gooing and playing on a blanket. And nearly everybody in my family has been charged by a grizzly bear while out working or recreating. And what came of that was people took me serious and people wanted to know, okay, like, what do you think? I didn't have the shining solution, but I brought people's stories forward and I would try to think of solutions if I could, but I always listened and it's always had a really good result. And there's been really good collaboration that has come out of it, but it is hard to do. I think now it's like my voice doesn't shake at all. I'm here to do good work. And if you don't speak up, then how do we make these changes?
Right, right. Amber, I was wondering if you could talk. I mean, when you and I were chatting the other day, we were talking about women's leadership and how the paradigm of what leadership even is changing, maybe from a more of a dominance model to, well, to what?
That's a good question. I think a very Western centric model of leadership is there's one leader, they're at the front of the room, they tell us how it's going to be, and that's how it is. And you fall in line or you jump ship and figure out a different ship you want to be on. I mean, that can be effective, things get done. I have a lot of experiences with women taking that approach and double downing on that approach. And what we try really hard to do at Women in Ranching, and it is hard and very complex and not for the faint of heart, is to have a shared leadership approach. And at any given point, someone is the active leader, someone is an active followership and supporting. It's hard. There are moments that are uncomfortable and difficult. And I think the work is done so much better and more beautifully. And I think the people who are showing up look different than, what Kristen spoke to of kind of what's been determined of who is agriculture, a 40 to 55-year-old white male. You see something very different at Women in Ranching. I was actually doing some research on cooperatives and like cooperative models, and Europe has cooperative businesses that have been in existence for hundreds of years. And there was research done on small businesses and entrepreneurs. If they go into it like we do, or what's predominant here in the West, like this independent, isolated experience, those businesses are much more likely to fail than ones that take a more cooperative approach or model. And when I think about like my individual experience here at Antelope Springs Ranch, my husband and I don't own the land. For a very, very long time, we did not own any cows. And it was through partnership and relationship that we built the business that we have and sustained. I want to give an example of leadership at its finest. We were working on this ranch for a management company. The management company folded, and so here we were in a place that we loved, on a ranch that we loved, but the framework around us was falling apart. So in 2018, I had this brief period of time where I told the universe all the things I wanted to do, and here's how I was going to get it done. And horrifyingly, in the fall of 2018, the universe said yes to all of it. And now I've spent about 5 years, 6 years actually like dedicating myself to doing what I said I was going to do.
What were some of those things?
Well, so I started writing letters, like handwritten letters to our landowner and saying, we want to be here. We're really proud of the work that we've done here. Is there an approach to this that isn't you selling it? because that was solution. As the management company folded, the ranch went up for sale. So I was hosting all kinds of nincompoops who wanted to come out here and kick the tires and tell us how they were going to come buy this big old ranch and they were going to do this and that and blah, blah, blah. And here I have kids who are 4 and 6 at the time. Like people are dropping their wives at the house and then going out with my husband to look at the ranch with the realtor. And I'm like entertaining women who are walking around my house and saying, when we own this, I'm going to completely redo this kitchen. I'm like,
Oh, God.
good for you. That's awesome. So while all of that was going on, I had been invited to a gathering of women in ranching in California. So here I go, like off to California to some unknown place with a bunch of, I didn't know any of these people. And when I sat in that space, here were folks, gosh, I think the youngest of us was 19. Maybe the most senior was like late 60s, early 70s, and sitting with all of these incredible women, all of whom, in my opinion, were so much farther ahead. Some of them owned their ranches, some of them were many, many generations on their ranches, some of them were brand new, but like had college degrees in animal science and ag and were super passionate. And as I sat and heard their stories of their work and their perspectives, and I mean, hard stories like, I want to make changes on the ranch. I have these really great ideas, but I'm afraid if I actually step up and start doing it, my husband's going to divorce me. And that's the only way I have access to land is through my marriage. Stories of, I know my husband's leaving me and I'm the landowner, but he's been the one managing it this whole time. Like I don't know how to care for my land. I'm really uncertain about this. People who were more in the middle of it and like raising grandchildren and I mean all the complexity that comes with a typical life and then that typical life being tied to landscape and seeing land as this great protagonist in the stories of these women's work and their livelihoods. So I leave there going, I don't know how I'm going to bring this back to Montana, but I want women in my own community to get to experience something like this. And at that point, Women in Ranching was being signed over to the Western Landowners Alliance. And so during all of that, I'm writing letters to our landowners saying, would you please consider not selling the ranch? We'd love to talk to you if it's possible. I'm putting together a business proposal to Leslie Allison and saying, I think Women in Ranching can be something like, could you hire me? Because I'm afraid otherwise, it's just going to sit. If there's not a dedicated person to lead a thing, people are busy and it's just not going to get done. So in December of 18, we had a landowner say, yes, I'm willing to hear a more creative solution. What is your idea? Which was for us to lease Antelope Springs. Well, moving from like managing for a company to taking on the financial lift of leasing a ranch and building out the enterprises, that's a big thing. And so it's like, yes, you can do it. And here's the price point for the lease. And I need the check in January. So here's my husband and I, like we build out our plan. We have cash flows. We'd lived on the ranch at that point for, I don't know, 4 or 5 years. So we kind of knew what we could turn and we knew we could be profitable. We go to the banks and they're just like, no, you have no capital. You have no assets. There's nothing we can take from you if this fails. You have a beagle dog and 6 horses. Like, good for you. That's not liquidity. That's not assets that we can take when this thing definitely fails. Yeah. So my husband at that point was just like, we can't do it. Like, this isn't going to work. And I was too naive, too blinded by hope to settle for a no. And at that point, we'd been working with our grazing clients for our whole experience here at Antelope Springs, and we shared with them, like, we can't actually do this. We can't get a loan from the bank. We don't have the cash to pay that first lease installment. And they prepaid their grass for the following year to give us the cash to cash flow our business.
Oh my goodness.
And only because of that, yes, were we able to step up into this. And so, again, these ideas that, number one, that it's only the men here doing all this is nonsense. These ideas that any of this are doing this alone without our community is nonsense. And I will forever be grateful and indebted by my heartstrings to people who said yes in those very earliest days. And like Leslie Allison hearing me, pitching this whole thing, and here's this business plan, and you should agree to this, and here's what it's going to do. What I've always appreciated about Leslie is she approaches things like a cowgirl. It's like she jumps, and then we figure it out as the ride goes. And if she hadn't been willing to do that, at least my part in this story definitely wouldn't be here.
Yeah. Leslie Allison, director of the Western Landowners Alliance, which was the first home of women in ranching, and then eventually you became a separate nonprofit after some years. And I have to say, I remember when Leslie went to, I think it was the very first meeting of women in ranching, and I had lunch with her when she came home, and she was like glowing with this sense of magic and what happens when women sit down together and really listen to each other. And she was talking about how, she would see these women and have these judgments about them, and then they started talking and all the judgments went away. And so she's really been a true believer from her own experience, and taught me a lot about leadership and the storytelling that is so important in bringing ideas forward.
Yeah. So if you don't mind, Kristen, you can say no if you don't want to answer this question, but one of the stories you shared with me that's left a deep impression was when you were doing leadership development, and somewhere along that journey, you had people in the room say, like, your storytelling, this isn't the way to go about it, and like you need to shorten up your stories or get to the point quicker, tighten up this whole thing. And as she was telling me that story, my reflection back to her was like, we are built for story. As a human species, our development and our development into community was built on shared story.
So that story, I was part of a leadership development cohort and was offered scholarship opportunity. It was like an honor for me to be picked. Was in the program first week, intensive week, and it was like a learning by doing. It wasn't a traditional academic model. And there were things that were going on. One is that there was bias. Women were interrupted, I think, nearly every single time that a woman opened her mouth to speak during this. There was discrimination of all kinds that maybe people weren't aware of, or maybe they were, but it was coming out. And in one of the instances, I naturally am a mediator or facilitator. I try to keep things flowing smoothly and have good feelings all around. And so I would ally for people that were not being able to be heard. And then it happened to me, and I was completely like downright silenced. There was a very specific question asked by the facilitator. I waited, responded appropriately. While I was responding, like one sentence in, I was interrupted, and nobody else had an answer for the question, and it went back to me. And I think I was so frustrated. And I said, as an Indigenous woman in these spaces, I have been silenced my entire life. And I just advocated for myself. And after that, I would say probably about 80% of the participants come up to me throughout that week with tears in their eyes and said, I should have said something. I should have stood up. I should have intervened, but nobody did. And I sat there. It was humbling. It was humiliating. It was so bad that like I wanted to go knock people out. Like I was treated like I did not have a SWAT, like I had no voice, like I was invisible. So afterwards, there was a lot of really positive support and feedback, and it changed the program, it changed the trajectory of it. But I had four different people come up to me throughout that week. They were all males, they're all white males. And each one said, it was slightly different, like you have a way with words, you're great with, this, and this. But have you ever thought about, like Amber said, getting to your point sooner, like shortening it up? Another one said, I don't know if that's your culture, but I notice you always tell a story. Have you thought about not doing that? And all of them gave me feedback of how to be more acceptable, how to be heard better, how to assimilate to what they wanted.
Well, how to be more like them, it sounds like.
Exactly. And I had to sit with that for a bit. And I really thought, okay, am I being long-winded? Am I not being like concise? And with everybody that I talked to and sitting with it in my own heart, and I thought, no, that's their bias coming out. And they had good intentions, but what come of it? It took a while. It really sat heavy on me for a while, and I processed it. So one of the things I start looking at was like, I want to bring out the best in people. I want people, like, I wish that I could talk to a younger version of myself
Mm.
and not have to go through the same obstacles and struggle and learn these hard lessons. And if there were nuggets of wisdom from any of the trauma, any of the adversity that I have experienced, any of these like difficult experiences, like what would that be? There was actually quite a few people at Women in Ranching that talked about the concept of co-creating. And I think that's like a beautiful thing. And it's a completely different idea than the way that things have been done. And I don't know, Amber, if you wanted to talk about that really briefly, or like what does co-creating mean? Because I think that's super important.
So, co-created spaces can be messy and uncomfortable. And the invitation that I try to make to folks when they're leading at Women in Ranching, speaking at Women in Ranching, providing education to members of our community is, what is the story that you need to tell? What is the story that you want other women to hear? That's co-created space. It's when we've welcomed folks to show up fully as they are, to share their wisdom and their experience and their expertise and their knowledge, and that they know they'll be supported in that. I think one of my greatest core values is freedom. And freedom to me is people walking in their authenticity, people walking in the world fully as themselves. And of course, what I want very most is that when people are walking that way, that they feel their light being shined back to them from others, that their light is being reflected back to them. And that's not what we all always experience. But if we can have even moments where we experience that sweetness and that safety and that kindness and that openness to listen without challenging, just listen, that allows room for growth, for possibility, for change. And those are the kind of spaces I want to be in. Those are the kind of spaces I want to help create. And we're trying really hard.
And I have to say, listening to you and in this whole conversation, the kind of dominant leadership style that you're very clearly departing from has so much to do with military chain of command. And of course, the goal of military action is to attack, win, dominate, displace. And it really doesn't seem like the right approach for land management, which is such a process of being with animals, being with plants, being with weather, being with land and water. And you're in as much of a process of listening and co-creating with land as you are, you can't tell it what to do. You have to be in that process of listening. And so it seems like what you're creating and what you're putting forth is so much more appropriate for ranching.
Well, thank you.
And on that note, I want to thank you both so much for being with us on Down to Earth. We could talk for another 17 hours and not get to the end of this wonderful set of topics, but you've both been great. Thanks so much for spending all this time.
Thank you, Mary Charlotte. Thank you, Kristen.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Down to Earth. We would love it if you would support this program, which you can do by going to patreon.com/down-to-earth-planet-to-plate, where you can sign up for as little as $3. Patreon is Patreon. And also please rate and review the podcast on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. The Quivira Coalition is a not-for-profit and a community network of ranchers, farmers, conservationists, scientists, educators, and many others dedicated to regenerative practices that produce healthy food, support meaningful livelihoods, sustain biodiversity, and remedy the impacts of climate change. To learn more about Quivira and how you can support their work, visit quiviracoalition.org, Quivira. And finally, this show is a production with the Radio Cafe. You can check out radiocafe.org to hear back episodes of this show and also find all kinds of other shows on a wide variety of topics as well. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.